irregularities, and we have seen them over the last 8 years. I'll hang up and listen to your response. Thank you.
Well, I think you're right in saying that there have been some regulations that have been put out by the Justice Department that were problematic. I'll tell you one thing. I really believe today, and I think we've seen some of the political appointees and political pressure that's been suggested in congressional hearings, which should not play no part in who gets to be a U.S. attorney or whatever it is. But I do have confidence in the civil rights areas of the Justice Department. There's some career employees who are terrific. They really believe in trying to make sure that people's rights, they've investigated the situation in Ohio, in Michigan, particularly Dearborn, Michigan, and other places in this state. And listen, it's up to the American people, because remember, these departments are part of, you are the ones that they're public servants for the American people, not the other way around. And I think if the American people insist that our departments are fair and fair-minded, and in terms of an election, non-political, that they just do their job, particularly the civil rights divisions, I think it'll happen. So if you have a complaint, you ought to report it to your member of Congress, to your Congress member, to your senator, or go right to the Justice Department and tell them what the problem is, and make sure they look into it. And your member of Congress is an ombudsman for you. They're the public servant that works for you, and that's what you should be doing.
Mary Rose O'Carr, the Journal. We start at 7 a.m. and leave you with a shot of downtown Denver. We'll see you then.
Up next, Newsmakers with General Victor Renuart, United States Northern Command Commander, on the role of the future of the North American Aerospace Defense Command. And then at 11 a.m., C-SPAN's coverage of the 2008 Democratic National Convention includes a live interview with Democratic National Committee Chair Howard Dean, who will take your phone calls and questions.
In 2000, there was only 800,000 children going to school in Afghanistan.
Tonight on C-SPAN's Q&A, 3 Cups of Tea author Greg Mortensen is building schools in Afghanistan and Pakistan, one at a time.
Predominantly, we're focused on girls' education. Obviously, it's important that the boys also receive an education, but I think ultimately it's women who promote the value of education in society. And I have, we can drop bombs or hand out condoms or build roads or put in electricity, but unless the girls are educated, I really think a society won't change.
Greg Mortensen tonight at 8 Eastern on C-SPAN's Q&A. You can also listen to Q&A on C-SPAN Radio, exclusively on XM satellite radio. It's also online as a C-SPAN podcast.
Well, there are thousands of military acronyms, and 2 that are very familiar are NORAD and NORTHCOM. And joining us today is the commander of NORTHCOM, General Victor Renuart. He is our guest on Newsmakers. General, thank you for being with us.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Here to question him, Gordon Leubold of the Christian Science Monitor and Martin Seif of UPI. General, if you would, before we get started with our reporters, just give us a brief snapshot of what NORAD and NORTHCOM are and what their purpose is.
Well, there are two commands that have increasingly interdependent missions. NORAD first, a binational command with partners from the U.S. and Canada, 50 years old this year, focused early on the air and space warning for the country and aerospace defense for both countries, the U.S. and Canada. It's modified over the years to add maritime warning, aerospace control, both inside and outside our borders. USNORTHCOM is a U.S. national command with a mission of anticipating threats to our nation and then being in a position to defend the homeland from those threats, as well as support civil authorities after a man-made or a natural disaster. So the two commands fit together very nicely. It runs the gamut from warning to consequence management in an event that's of significance to either our nation or that of our close partner, Canada.
And all headquartered in Colorado Springs.
All headquartered in Colorado Springs.
Gordon Leupold.
General, I'm interested in Georgia, the kind of a secondary concern emerged about cyber terrorism, and I know that you've been kind of focused on this issue. Looking at it from where you sit, is the U.S. prepared for a cyber attack, and what are the kind of preparations you're making to be there for it?
Well, I think we've seen two significant examples of cyber attacks that have affected nations, certainly last week in Georgia and about a year ago in Estonia. And both cases you have seen events occur within the cyber networks of those two countries that have had significant effects on their economic well-being and certainly their security interest. We need to ensure that we learn the lessons of those events and that we continue to strengthen an integrated process to defend ourselves against these kinds of intrusions. Today we are funded to work those problems, but in more segmented fashion than probably is best effective. The Department of Homeland Security has been given the mission for cyber defense for the nation. As such, their role is to integrate the other elements of government. But it's not just a government departmental problem. It is private industry. It is many of the sectors that the media operates in. All of those have to come together in a unified effort if we are to maintain adequate defense against those who might intrude to our networks and then try to disrupt them. And it's a big challenge.
General, following on from that, do we therefore need, first of all, a national wake-up call on the cybersecurity threat? And secondly, in your judgment, do we need a Goldwater-Nichols type of legislation from the next Congress to give you DHS and the other agencies the integrative interoperability that they need to deal with the problem?
Well, I think better integration of the various agencies, the creation of more synergy among those agencies is critical to success in this particular field, much like it is in space. We have truly a global network out there that we all participate in. And so if you're going to be successful at defending it, you have to have strong and close integration among the various agencies. As to whether that requires a Goldwater-Nichols kind of act, I'm not expert enough to say from a governmental standpoint. I can speak only from my role as a Joint Combatant Commander. Goldwater-Nichols has helped the Department of Defense create a much more unified effort in a variety of conflicts around the world. And so I see great benefit from that. But those are tough decisions for the institutions of government, and we have to force that discussion, I think, to ensure that even if you don't call it a Goldwater-Nichols, there is some sort of forcing function that helps us to be more unified in this effort of cyber defense.
Thank you very much. Again, one other follow-up, and that is, there is, of course, discussion of this in the media, but do you think we in the media need to focus more on the specific areas you're talking about? Do the public and the major executives of U.S. cyber corporations need a wake-up call on this? Do they need to be alerted to the threat?
Well, I think the events in Estonia and in Georgia really have had that effect. I think the really difficult challenge is because this is such a broad area and it touches so many different elements of our society, business, medical care, information, certainly military and economic. many of those same organizations are struggling with how do you pull them together in a more coherent fashion. So I'm hopeful that this wake-up call will continue to drive us closer together. I do know that the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Defense are working aggressively together on this, and we are seeing great participation from some of the partner corporations out there who deal in the cyber world. But again, this is a big challenge that we have to work together on.
Is there a sense that the private sector, maybe more so than the government sector, doesn't fully understand how the role that they should be playing, or is it kind of across the board, everybody's still trying to put the pieces together?
You know, in many ways, the private sector is in a bit more advanced than government is in this area. You know, I'll use the banking industry, the investment industry as examples. They have built protective measures into their systems every day that in many ways are further advanced than we are within some of our Department of Defense programs. That is their lifeblood. As we in the military, as we across the Department of Defense look at ways to improve our security, partnering with them so that we have compatible measures of security. And I think will be critically important to us, and that's something we have to work towards. So there are some who are lagging a bit. There are some who are actually further ahead than we are. But as we found in my world in NORTHCOM, where we are looking at interoperable communications for all of our responders, getting everyone on essentially the same set of protocols is one of the keys to having a more aggressive defensive posture.
General, could you just explain why NORAD, North American Aerospace Defense Command, is worried about cybersecurity and worried about situations in Russia and Georgia?
Well, I think as every factor of our culture we too are reliant upon the networks out there that move information, that move data, that help us understand what threats may be. And so we rely on space-based and land-based sensors to give us alert and warning of potential threats, whether that be missile or an aircraft or a cruise missile or a light airplane who's just not following the right procedures. And so intrusions into that network, that global integrated network that we all participate in, disrupt our ability to provide the right kind of warning to our nation's leaders of an attack. And so it's critical to our mission that we are comfortable that we have a secure network, that it's resilient to probes and attacks, and that it will be able to sustain good decision making for not only my commands, but for the nation's leaders.
How much does it concern you? I mean, part of the issue with cyber terrorism is that someone could declare war, as if, in effect, on the U.S. and nobody would know where it was coming from, whatever. And so it's kind of like it could be like a 9/11 moment in that sense. How much does it concern you? Does it keep you up at night, that kind of thing, or?
Well, it doesn't keep me up at night because I'm comfortable that we too have very good and very highly capable people working this problem. And so at the same time as that we see people probing our networks, I'm also comfortable that within the Department of Defense, primarily through U.S. Strategic Command and their computer network attack and defense experts, they're working this problem for us. They're working fixes when we see a probe, and they're working defensive measures that we can keep in place. The important element of this is we continue to proliferate that effort on a consistent fashion across all of the elements of government.
General, you've pointed out that the Arctic is going to be an increasingly important area of strategic concern. The Russians, of course, are very active in this. They sent the Marshal Ustinov, their quite modern cruiser, the anti-submarine vessel, I believe, and the Slava-class cruiser to Spitsbergen, and they ignored the Norwegian 200-mile limits there. Are you satisfied with the level of strategic alertness we have in the Arctic and the amount of assets you've been given to deal with there, or do you think in the future we need to step up our military presence in the Arctic?
Well, I think as we've seen reporting recently, there are more and more experts in natural resources that believe that there are untapped resources in the Arctic.
Exactly.
As you know, there are many nations who have laid claim to portions of that to gain access to those resources. We have seen an increase in navigable water in the Arctic in the last few years that has brought not just research vessels or military vessels, but also tourist vessels in there. So there's a broad area of concerns in the Arctic that I pay attention to every day. How do you ensure that we have adequate search and rescue capability when that cruise ship runs aground? How do you ensure that we have a presence there that can monitor the movement of other military forces in that region to make sure that we are not unduly worried about the presence of a foreign nation? How do we participate in the right fora that will discuss and negotiate presence of each of those nations in the region? And I think for us, this is an area that we have not been present in a lot. You couldn't be present in it to some degree for a period of time, but we're starting to see more access. In my NORAD role, of course, we are responsible to monitor that airspace to ensure that any aircraft that is unidentified approaching either the nations of the U.S. or Canada is identified and its intentions are made clear. So we do have to maintain a presence in there. As you may know, Canada is building a military base up along the Northwest Passage to increase its presence there. Each of the nations in the Arctic that have an interest in the Arctic region are pursuing more presence. And I think it's prudent for us to have a serious discussion with our country that determines what that means for us in a security fashion. I don't see a threat to the nation coming from the Arctic, but I do see security concerns that will arise as you have nations compete for resources, as you have nations compete for passage, as you have commercial interest competing for passage through those areas. And all of those have a security element that I think we just have to have a good discussion about. And participating in the unclosed forums is important to us. I hope we will be able to ratify that agreement here soon so that we can have a seat at the table and allow for not just a military discussion, but really a national discussion on the strategic interests in that region.
Do you consider Russia to be a growing threat to the U.S.?
Russia is a growing power because of many reasons. They, as you know, went through a period after the Cold War ended where resources were tight, their economy struggled, but as you know also they have a large natural gas reserve, they have large oil reserves. That has infused money back into their economy. The economy is becoming more successful, and certainly they have a sphere of influence because of those resources that is growing. But do I believe that today Russia is a security threat to the United States? I'm not as worried that Cold War relationship is returning so much. But certainly we do see Russians expanding their presence. They've sailed their nuclear submarines a lot farther from home than they have in the past. They're flying their long-range bombers more than they have in the past. They've tested some intercontinental ballistic missiles. And so those are things that we have to pay attention to. But I think it's important also not to swing the pendulum too much in an alarmist fashion. The Russian aircraft that have been flying have done so professionally and complied with our request as we've provided them to them. You may know a few months ago, or a couple of months ago, they filed a flight plan and followed that exactly. So we do have a number of confidence-building measures that we keep on going with the Russians. The current events in Georgia clearly are having an effect, and the nations of the world have to decide how they will deal with that for the future. From our standpoint, we continue to be vigilant. We continue to monitor our airspace. And we, if needed, we will go out and identify any unidentified aircraft out in our airspace or approaching our airspace.
General Norton Schwartz, at his confirmation hearings, as you know, sir, as the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, told the Russians that if they deployed Tupolev 160 supersonic bombers in Cuba, that would be crossing a red line. That was obviously strong talk from General Schwartz, obviously had the full approval of the President and the Secretary of Defense. How seriously would we consider the deployment of Tupolev 160s, which of course are supersonic Mach 2, in either Venezuela or Cuba? Would that be a significant challenge to NORAD's capabilities?
Well, I'm very comfortable with NORAD's capabilities every day,
Sure.
and I am extremely confident that should something like that occur, we would have more than sufficient force to deal with something like that. As to whether it crosses a red line for a nation, that's a political decision that our President and that administration would have to take, and do that in cooperation with other nations in the hemisphere. I think for us, continuing to maintain the close partnership and dialogue with those nations is important, and I think we would have to work in collaboration with them on a strong declaration for anyone from another region bringing military force that could threaten any of the nations here in our hemisphere.
So Northern Command is engaged in border security along the southwest border. General Gates, Secretary Gates has talked about the need for remote control aircraft, UAVs, over Iraq and Afghanistan. But that takes the capability potentially away from the border area where a lot of people think UAVs could be used very effectively more. What's your view on that?
Well, I think there's great utility in unmanned vehicles in support of the law enforcement agencies along our border. We have flown some, not large numbers. We do have some challenges with the management of airspace along our borders. We work in close partnership with the FAA because of their concern, their very real concern for safe air traffic operations in our country. So we work closely with them to deconflict the use of an unmanned vehicle as we put it in and amongst manned aircraft. But we've also looked at some other ways to work this problem. First of all, the Department of Homeland Security is through their Customs and Border Patrol departments have invested in some of their own unmanned systems. We are assisting them in training and preparing them to be used along our borders. We have taken advantage of manned aircraft like our Civil Air Patrol and National Guard aircraft that have been purchased with counter-narcotics money to use for these kinds of purposes. UAVs are a vehicle to move a sensor. You can also move that sensor with a manned aircraft, and so whether it's a manned or an unmanned doesn't really matter to me. It's the presence, the persistence of those sensors that provides great support to DEA and Customs and Border and those folks.
You feel like you have the assets you need for those kinds of missions, given the way the military is stretched overseas?
Clearly the military is stretched in every aspect: Army, Navy, Air Force, manned systems, unmanned systems. We're busy, we're engaged in Afghanistan and Iraq for sure, but in Kosovo, we've got folks deployed in Korea. I mean, we are engaged around the world. So we have to make decisions every day to balance the needs in a particular theater against the forces available. I've been supported very well by the department. There have been a couple cases when I've specifically asked for some UAV support that I might traditionally not have. Great example was the San Diego County fires last year, the Northern California fires this year. We flew the Global Hawk unmanned vehicle, 60,000 feet, well above any air traffic. Great sensors, provided infrared imagery that we declassified and moved through DHS portals right down to the fire chief fighting that fire on the ground, so he could reposition fire teams against hotspots that he didn't know exist. So there's some interesting uses of technology out there that don't require an unmanned vehicle necessarily. We've had some support from space-based resources as well. But where I've needed an unmanned vehicle, the department has leaned forward to try to let me have that and let me use it as long as I need it, and then I have a role to give it back just as quickly as I can, and we've been pretty good at that partnership.
We have obviously excellent assets, the best in the world in terms of in the air, above ground border security, sir, but you've expressed before concern about underground security, about the threat of drug cartels operating with impunity in tunnels under the border with Mexico, and of course they can put in not just narcotics, they can also put in terrorists or munitions that terrorists can use. How seriously would you assess that problem, and what do we need to do about it?
Well, first I'd say that, well, I guess I would not say that the cartels have operated with impunity, because we are increasingly successful at finding those tunnels and passing that information to the appropriate law enforcement agencies. But the tunnels are a reality and a challenge. We have been able to take advantage of some technology that really was developed even in the early days of Afghanistan to help detect tunnels, and we've applied that along the border. We pass that information to our law enforcement friends to allow them to inspect those tunnels when we find them or interdict traffic that flows through them. But these enemies we see, these narcotics traffickers, much like terrorists in other parts of the world, are learning adversaries. As you close one route, they'll open another. We've had success interdicting air traffic routes, and so they move to the sea. We had success at interdicting some of the maritime-borne routes, and so they move back to the air, or they move to the ground. And so if we believe we have solved the problem, we are almost guaranteeing that it will come back. But you can't take your eye off the ball in this kind of a situation. And so we pay close attention to the use of tunnels. There are some great ways for us to try to predict areas where tunnels could be more easily created. And we may not know for sure that there's a tunnel there, but we know that the soil composition, the terrain might allow for that better than in other places. And so we're working in close partnership with our law enforcement friends to provide them that technical support so that they can then go and do the law enforcement operations that they need.
General, you've touched on kind of a seemingly unique aspect of NORTHCOM, which is your cooperation with civilian agencies and domestic issues. Could you expand on that, and is there a concern about the militarization of some of these agencies? And also, what role does NORTHCOM play in major events such as the Super Bowl and the upcoming Democratic National Convention and the Republican National Convention?
Well, important for me to make a very strong point here, and that is that the relationships we have with now about 60 federal partners every day are extremely close and extremely solid. When I leave here today, I'll go and spend some time with the FBI. They've been a great partner in our counterterrorism efforts, and certainly in partnering with other law enforcement agencies in the drug counter-narcotics world. Those relationships have required time to build. They require effort to maintain. But we are seeing a team now that is closer knit than maybe ever before. 45 of those 60 agencies live in my headquarters every day. They've assigned senior officers from their staff to be part of our operation. We in turn have integrated them fully into our planning and our operations and our interagency coordination process. That's paid great results for us. So I think the days where some would criticize, or would say NORTHCOM has friction between itself and DHS or the law enforcement folks, those days are gone. We are working hand in hand. I have individuals in the National Counterterrorism Center, in the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force, integrated into DHS, integrated into some of these other agencies that we deal with every day. My Joint Task Force North down in El Paso is there directly to support DHS's El Paso Intelligence Center, EPIC. We are there to support. We're not there to militarize those organizations. But we do bring some capability that is part of the culture of the military, especially in the area of planning. And so we've been eager to share that expertise Those organizations have been eager to participate with us, and we're seeing now a synergy that's really, really strong. As to your second question about things that we're participating in today, of course, we're keeping a close eye on Hurricane Faye. Fortunately, the state of Florida is in good shape there with their capabilities. We are participating in the preparation for and the support to the Democratic and the Republican National Convention. We have a unique joint task force in each of those states, commanded by a National Guard officer who has authority both in a Title 32 status, or his state status, and authority in a Title 10 status over active duty military that are assigned to support. And we're providing things like communications and medical contingency care, bomb disposal, bomb detection capabilities, a lot of those sorts of things, so that we can ensure that we do everything possible to make these safe events for the people that are participating.
One more question.
Sir, kind of at your core, you're an airman. The Air Force has had some a bumpy road lately. I'm just curious, how do you see the Air Force kind of coming to heal itself and get back on track?
Well, you're right. We've had a little bit of a rocky road the last year and a half or so with a number of events. I've known General Mosley a long time. He's a great patriot, and really we honor the service that he gave to the nation. I know General Schwartz well as well. He is also a great patriot. He's focused on helping the Air Force move forward from the events of the last couple of years, and I think he will bring a unique, very joint perspective that I think will be helpful. The Air Force is okay. We've got great young men and women out there who have been put in tough positions before in their lives, and they are resilient and they're focused and they know the importance of what we do. So I'm not worried about our Air Force people in terms of their motivation and their ability to meet those core competencies that we value. We do have to work to improve our institution. We do have to ensure that we never put our nuclear capability at risk. We have to ensure that we improve our acquisition process so that we are not called into question when we move towards what we believe to be the best capability for the dollar that we spend. We have to make sure that our people are fully integrated into the joint team and that they are part of that joint force commander's operation in every aspect, whether that is moving convoys of supplies over the ground, or doing emergency ordnance disposal, or security of bases, or flying combat missions, or moving humanitarian aid like we did in Georgia and the tsunami and all of these other places around the world. Our Air Force is, in many cases, the first symbol of American freedom and democracy in some of these locations. We have to carry that banner proudly, and I'm comfortable that we'll do that, and Nordy Schwartz is a great leader who's going to take us exactly down that road.
Martin C., final question.
What should we prioritize on, General? As you said, we have threats all around the world. We've been focusing on the Islamist threat. Now the Russians certainly are at least banging the drums. Iran is still there. And as you point out, there's the Arctic. You have massive homeland security threats. Are there places off the radar? Are there threats that you would like to see more priority given to?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges in this job is that on any given day, any one of those things will be number one. On some days, a couple of them are number one. And so our role, both in the NORAD and the NORTHCOM responsibilities, is to ensure that we're not letting things go below the radar scope. We have to pay equal attention to terrorist threat information that may be developing in Afghanistan or Pakistan, and looking at how that networks, maybe all the way back to the U.S. if we see that. These terrorist cells operate in a network of networks, so we look to trace those threads. But we also have to pay attention to the developing role of missile defense as it supports our nation, to ensure that a rogue nation doesn't take advantage of a moment when we're not paying attention and threaten us. We have to pay attention to Air threats inside our borders. We saw in 9/11 a use of commercial aircraft that we've never seen before and hadn't anticipated. We anticipate that today. We look for it today. In fact, just yesterday we intercepted a light aircraft who entered the Washington, D.C. Restricted area. Inadvertently, it was not a threat, but it was a concern. We intercepted that aircraft. We escorted him to a landing field. He was questioned when he landed on the ground. And that's the role we have to be prepared to play every day, and we do that. And that stays below the radar scope of our nation, but it's not off our radar scope. At the same time, we have border security, we have natural disasters, we have the concern over man-made threats, whether they be inadvertent, like an industrial accident, or intentional, like a terrorist threat. We have to pay attention to each of those areas, and on any given day, one of them will be our highest priority. So for us, you asked what keeps me awake at night, is that what keeps me awake is making sure that our team is focused on the many threats out there and not taking anyone for granted, not leaving anyone unobserved.
General Victor Renuart is the commander of the Northern Command, 4-star Air Force General. Thank you for being on Newsmakers. Gordon Lubold of the Christian Science Monitor, Martin Seif of UPI. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
The Democratic National Convention, live, gavel to gavel, and commercial-free on C-SPAN. But with no commercials, how is C-SPAN funded?
From donations?
More than likely advertisers.
It's government funded. I don't know. Maybe just funding.
Government.
I think it's a consortium of cable companies.
That's right. For nearly 30 years, America's cable companies have been providing C-SPAN programming, like the summer's political conventions, commercial-free, as a public service.
Stand by.
A view of the Denver skyline, known as the Mile High City, also the state capital for Colorado. These pictures courtesy of the CBS affiliate here in Denver. Delegates are arriving this weekend, many coming in today at the Denver International Airport for the start of the Democratic National Convention, which will convene beginning tomorrow afternoon in live gavel-to-gavel coverage here on C-SPAN. But today, on this Sunday all day, we're going to preview the convention. We'll be talking politics at the top of the hour with the chairman of the Democratic National Convention, Howard Dean. Later this afternoon at 6 o'clock Eastern Time, 4 o'clock here in Denver, a conversation on the role of primaries, conventions, and the debates. Among the participants, former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, former Vice President and 1984 Democratic presidential nominee Walter Mondale, and the current chairs of the Commission on Presidential Debates, Frank Fahrenkopf and Paul Kirk. And a look at tomorrow's schedule when the convention gets underway beginning at 5 o'clock East Coast time. As part of our gavel-to-gavel coverage, the speakers will include in prime time Michelle Obama, the wife of Democratic nominee Barack Obama, the Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, former President Jimmy Carter, and there will be a tribute to Senator Ted Kennedy. All of the scheduling information is available on our site for politics, cspan.org/politics, and also our convention hub, which is a new feature here on C-SPAN. You can track the blogs. You can also find out what people are twittering here on C-SPAN, and that's all available at cspan.org/politics. This is what the convention hub looks like. This convention is one in which we're looking and dealing with a lot of new technology, certainly online with the use of video. Back in 2004, when Howard Dean was running for president, he used the internet to raise funds, and we'll be talking with Howard Dean later this morning. But in 2008, the internet has been used with a lot of video, including Skype technology. Richard Weinstein of our staff is inside the Pepsi Center, which is where the convention will take place for the first 3 days, and will give us a preview using Skype technology to give you a sense of what it looks like inside the arena. And we're going to show that to you in just a couple of minutes. But what we want to do now is share with you a preview with the mayor of Denver and also the governor, Governor Bill Ritter. Yesterday at Invesco Field, they previewed what will happen during the next couple of days here in Denver. By the way, historical note, the convention was last here in Denver back in 1908. The nominee that year was William Jennings Bryan. Next week, of course, we will be in St. Paul, Minnesota for the Republican convention, the first time ever that the Democrats and Republicans have had back-to-back conventions, and our coverage next weekend in Minneapolis, St. Paul. But up next, from yesterday, from Invesco Field, which is where Senator Barack Obama will formally accept his party's nomination, with about 70,000 people in attendance, a preview with the mayor of Denver and the governor of Colorado.
Ready? Good morning. My last swig. What's that? You guys don't need a white? Sorry, just kidding. Welcome. My name is John Hickenlooper. I'm the mayor of Denver. We are delighted to finally, after almost 2 years of planning, to really be here and to be kicking off, I think, what'll be one of the greatest conventions in history. I just lost my breath coming up those stairs. It's not a good sign, is it? What we're really proud about is having a convention in the Rocky Mountain West, because we think that a lot of what the Western values symbolize is exactly what this country needs now, and certainly those values are what Barack Obama has come to stand for. This is an area where people, it doesn't matter who your parents were, who your grandparents were, it matters who you are and how hard you're willing to work to achieve your dreams. You don't accept the status quo. When I came in as mayor, I'd never been in politics. People said you couldn't change City Hall without a lot of experience inside the machine, right? And yet we've cut chronic homeless by 36%. We've been able to reduce crime by double digits the last 3 years. We've been able to reach out and create a relationship with the public schools so that we have the most rapidly improving public school system, public school district in the entire state. All these things are by bringing fresh ideas, taking large groups of people and creating a collaborative environment, which is exactly what Barack Obama's been talking about for the last year and a half. And I think when you step back and look at what the West has, one of the great natural wonders of the world, the Colorado Rockies, 300 days of sunshine, biking, 850 miles of bike path. It's a place I always joke that people get up earlier on the weekends than they do on the weekdays. But that quality of life makes us willing to come together and work cooperatively to achieve our goals, to solve problems. And again, that's what Barack Obama is all about. We don't pick sides based on parties. We try to, once the election's over, we put down the weapons, we work together, we collaborate to find solutions and move this country forward, and that becomes more important every year that goes by. And I'd like to introduce one of my great friends, and certainly in terms of a person's ability to build alliances and relationships, someone who can reach across the aisle and say, wait a second, let's get away from the petty stuff. Let's recognize that our common self-interest is so much more powerful than our more narrowly defined self-interest. If we can work together on some of these issues collaboratively, we can accomplish huge, huge things. And that is Ken Salazar, our senator, who is, I think, one of the most visionary and talented senators in the entire U.S. Senate. Thank you, Mayor. I want to welcome all of you here to Mile High, Colorado. We are 5,280 feet above sea level here, and it's very appropriate that as we launch the convention and we welcome the world here to the state of Colorado, that we take the inspiration from the West, from the grandeur of our Rocky Mountains, and we move forward with a united Obama-Biden ticket that will change the world forever. And in that change of the world forever, what we need to do is to make sure that we create the peace of the world back together again, that we move forward in the right ways in Iraq and Afghanistan and deal with the issues of terrorism, that we bring about the kind of change that will move the energy future that Governor Ritter and Mayor Hickenlooper have been leading here in Colorado, and that we deal with the issue of health care for all Americans. That change requires a new beginning, and that's what Barack Obama, with his freshness, will bring here to Colorado and to our country and to the world. So I'm excited that we are having this convention here in Colorado. I'm excited that we will see the acceptance speech here of Barack Obama on this Thursday night here at Mile High. And
at the end of the day, what we're going to see is a launching of our nominee to the White House in November. The road to the White House we knew from several years ago would come through the West. The independence of the West, the results orientation that people like Governor Ritter and Mayor Hickenlooper have, that's ultimately what Barack Obama stands for, and that's why he ultimately is going to win this November election, and it's our pride really to be able to launch him in that successful effort here at Mile High. I also want to just take a quick second and say something about my good friend Joe Biden. I'm a good friend of both Barack Obama's and Joe Biden's. You know, Joe Biden brings a tremendous amount of energy to this ticket. He is by far one of the best experts on foreign policy in the entire United States Senate and the entire country. We need to put the world back together again, and Joe Biden is that person to complement Barack Obama's experience, both of them serving on the Foreign Policy Committee in the U.S. Senate, to help us put the world back together again. And secondly, from a law enforcement point of view, I served as Attorney General of this state for 6 years. I worked on COPS programs and burn grant programs and violence against women's programs. And there is no senator in the United States Senate who is better than Joe Biden in terms of making sure that we are keeping America secure here at home. So I'm very, very proud of the choice that Barack Obama has made in Joe Biden. And with that, I want to introduce the governor of Colorado. You know, sometimes you think about people's history and what has got them to where they are. You know, my good friend John Hickenlooper, who has worked so tirelessly on this convention and has done so much to help make this city a great city, and who is a great leader in the entire metropolitan area and throughout the state of Colorado. He's brought vision to this state. My good friend Bill Ritter, I think of his history as a missionary, someone who had choices and decided that he was going to be a servant to the people and spent his time working for people who were struggling in Africa. My good friend Bill Ritter has come to the governorship of the state of Colorado after having been in law enforcement for a long time. And the revolution that is underway here in Colorado includes the energy revolution, where we're making major, major strides in creating a new energy frontier for Colorado. And so it is my honor to call Bill and John partners, and for them, I just say thank you for having created this moment here at Mile High.
Thank you. Thanks, Senator. I was talking to a columnist the other day, and they said, really, what is the difference between you and Senator Salazar? You're both from rural areas. You know, you both have large families. I said the difference is the Salazars rode in on the woolly mammoth. They came in on tusked creatures. They've been here so long, generations and generations. I think the three of us represent in a way what Colorado's about. We all, I think, have found a way to talk to people of this state about issues that really matter to that people. It's no secret that in Colorado there are more independent voters than there are either Republicans or Democrats. And in part, that is, I think, a statement about where voters are with respect to party politics. And I really am happy as well that Barack Obama gets to make his acceptance speech here in Invesco Field, which I think is that night sort of the place where the statement about what has happened in the West and the political landscape in the West will be told best. That's because Montana and Wyoming and Colorado, Kansas, Oklahoma, Arizona, New Mexico, they all have Democratic governors. They're all Democratic governors who succeeded Republicans. Many of them have been re-elected in heavily Republican states, but really it's because of the way those governors have governed. And they've governed to a group of people who really are the electorate and say, we want leadership, we want people who are about change, we want people who really will take this country forward in a better and a different way. I would also echo what Senator Salazar said about Senator Joe Biden. As a prosecutor as the district attorney, I was a prosecutor for a long time before that, but the DA from '93 until 2005, and the person in the United States Senate who I think did the best job of leading this country forward with respect to really security policy, domestic security policy we'd call it, but law enforcement issues and really crime issues was Joe Biden. He authored the 1994 Crime Control Act. He was the first person to author and get passed a significant piece of federal legislation regarding domestic violence against women. It's called the Violence Against Women's Act. And it really was an important piece of legislation for us as prosecutors to use as tools to combat that. I've just watched Joe Biden's leadership in the Senate, and particularly over the 90s. While Joe Biden was there and while the Clintons were there, we experienced in criminal justice policy really a reinventing of how to respond to crime, and we saw the largest decrease in violent crime in the history of the country. At the same time, we saw the greatest expansion in the country's economy. You put Joe Biden and Barack Obama together on a ticket, and I really do think you see a different way forward for this country. He complements Barack Obama in such a significant way. This promise of change is really a substantive promise, and I think Joe Biden represents that as well. So we will be delighted to be here on Thursday night, to be in Invesco Field, at really the heart of the West, where the West, becomes the heartland of America, to nominate Barack Obama, and certainly at the Pepsi Center on Wednesday night to nominate and hear from Joe Biden. So with that, I think we'll take questions, and we certainly appreciate your attention this morning. Thank you.
How does that help Obama in Colorado as well as other Democrats in Colorado?
As well as other... Well, I think Biden just so complements Barack Obama. And, you know, we live in challenging times in the 21st century, and to put someone with his foreign policy and his national security expertise onto the ticket really helps us ensure that we'll rise to those challenges in an important way. People think about this oftentimes in terms of geography, and, you know, I was running for governor, and they said, well, don't pick anyone from Denver, because Colorado's a big state. I did. I picked a lieutenant governor from Denver because she shared my passion about children, and we never looked back. I mean, I think the important part is the relationship between the person that's the president and the vice president, and together what they bring in securing our nature's future and really promising the change that they've talked about for now a very long time.
Can we get your thoughts on Joe Biden?
You know, from the point of view of a big city mayor, I don't think Barack Obama could have picked a better vice president. Joe Biden has been at the forefront of a lot of urban policy issues. The governor was just talking about his domestic violence legislation. He has consistently shown that you don't throw money at problems, right? You come up with solutions, and then you measure your investment, you measure your outcomes. He will be very warmly received by the mayors of this country.
When you take a look at this stadium, we had a football game last night. We got the speech coming up on Thursday. How much more do they have to do? What are your thoughts about what's going to happen here at this stadium?
Well, this is one of those things. We had 4 days to look at it, but we had about 150 people looking. And it's pretty clear. You know, we're out here in the West. We do a lot of hiking and whitewater rafting. When you're in rough water, everybody paddles, right? And so they've been out there working. I don't think it's going to be a problem. I've talked to the manager of this facility, and they feel they're going to have to hustle, but it'll all be fine.
Much has been made of the success that you've had turning Colorado from a red state into at least a purple state. And it's been attributed to understanding, or in some case representing, a rugged individualism. My question is, does Barack Obama, is he a good fit for that? Is he rugged and is he individualist?
I've known Barack as a dear friend, and I think what people need to understand about Barack Obama is his history. I mean, here is the son of a mother from Kansas. Here is the grandson of a soldier from World War II who marched across Europe. Here is a son of a father from Kenya who came to America looking for freedom. And so I think when you put all of the different elements of Barack Obama together, and you see the choices that he's made in life, he's the kind of servant leader that Bill Ritter is. He's the kind of servant leader that we want to have in the White House. He's not going to be beholden to anybody. He's going to make sure that those great challenges that confront our nation and our world are in fact addressed. You know, when he graduated from Harvard Law School and he was on law review, he had lots of choices that he could have made that would have been in personal pursuit of wealth. He made another choice, and that was to go out and serve the public. So I think when you look at Barack Obama's life story, his work on the Foreign Relations Committee, his work on the Veterans Affairs Committee, his time in the legislature in Illinois, and his service to the public in community service, I just think there is no one who would be better to represent us as President of the United States. And I think that those values will transcend well here in Colorado. I think Coloradans, as they get to know Barack Obama, will certainly make sure that the 90 electoral votes here in Colorado are cast for Barack. And I don't want to get too much into policy, but I'll just do two quick things. You know, I look about who's in touch with rural Colorado. Well, for many of us, we worked very hard for 3.5 years on the Farm Bill because we want to revitalize rural America, the forgotten America. Well, Barack Obama was on our side all the way, a champion. On the other hand, John McCain was against what we were doing on the Farm Bill. on renewable energy that we all have worked on so hard here in Colorado. We know the incentives on the production tax credit and other things that are so important. Barack Obama was on our side getting those things, trying to get those things across the finish line. John McCain was on the other side. So I think for Colorado, Barack Obama is the right choice.
You know, just to also, you talked about rugged individualism. Look at what the primary campaign he went through. I mean, that's a rugged individual there. And it's also worth noting that the West is about rugged individualism, but what really opened up the West was the wagon train, right? An organizational approach to everyone having their job, everyone working together, everyone on a team collaborating. And that is one thing that Barack Obama does probably better than any elected official in this country.
You did Senator McCain's attacks with an ad today using Joe Biden's own words against Obama will hurt, and how do you counter that?
I think Americans understand politics, and that when you're in a bit of a fight, whether it's a primary fight or otherwise, those kinds of things are a product of it. We'll see who McCain picks, but there are things said about him by people that are some of his top VP candidates, so that may come back to hurt him. But this is, it's a bare-knuckle sport. Politics is. We know that. We're Americans, but it's an important process, and so I think that it's going to be something everybody is able to look at and understand. It's just a product of what you get from this kind of immediate advertisement that sort of comes, with every announcement. I kind of want to pick up on something the mayor said, because I do think that it's right to think about rugged individualism, and I agree that if you survive a presidential primary fight like he did, you're at the very least rugged. And I think he's also a great individual in terms of thinking about the way he does things and the way that he believes things should go. He has also something that we have in the West. I've had now to respond to a couple different tornadoes, to a wildfire, to other kinds of what we would call disasters. There's natural disasters. Boy, the people out here pick up for each other, and you can't believe how quickly communities respond to help each other out and to lift each other up. And I think, to your point, Mayor, that's Barack Obama as well. That's why this state, I believe, and people in the West really get this guy, and he'll resonate with him, because I believe he is about how we function in communities as well.
What do you make of having two senators on the ticket? I mean, does that really speak to being in touch with, it seems like a Washington-centric ticket as opposed to a people-centric ticket? And then are we in for the longest speeches ever in this?
I think we watched Joe Biden in this primary season being very disciplined, and I think his expertise is what shines above everything else. And I think it's been said here, it's about law enforcement and making sure we have a homeland security that works here in the United States of America with law enforcement. It's also about foreign policy, and I think that's ultimately what shines through with Senator Biden. And I think it's a compliment to it's a compliment to Senator Obama. Two senators on the ticket. From my point of view, when we talk about COPS programs, which the governor and I have worked on for such a long time, I know what the sheriffs and the 14,000 police officers of my state tell me about that program. They want it. Okay, when we talk about burn grants, they want those programs. And so I think that ultimately people are going to say, these senators really know how to deliver on behalf of the state of Colorado, and that ultimately will win the day. I will say one additional point about Barack Obama and Joe Biden here. It's been very interesting to watch the reaction early this morning from wonderful people who I know. Senator Chuck Hagel from Nebraska, Senator Dick Lugar from Indiana, Senator Arlen Specter from Pennsylvania. The comments that they have made about Joe Biden have been extraordinary. He is an extraordinary American, and that's why he's going to bring so much to this ticket.
I think we're praying for the kind of weather that we had last night here at Mile High Stadium for the Denver Bronco Green Bay game. I was down in Pueblo. It was a beautiful night in Pueblo. So, this is a beautiful state, and like somebody said, 300 days of sunshine. We are really, again, looking forward to this, and we believe that it's going to look very much like it looks today and like it looked last night. Thank you very much.
Senator Salazar, Governor Hickenlooper of Denver, and Governor Ritter, the hosts of this convention here in the Mile High City. The Denver skyline, the convention formally getting underway tomorrow. And the man who decided to select this city is Howard Dean, the former governor of Vermont, the chairman of the Democratic National Committee. He's joining us from our studios in the U.S. Bank Building on the 21st floor here in Denver. Mr. Chairman, thanks very much for joining us on C-SPAN.
Thanks for having me on.
Let me ask you about some of the mechanics, first of all, of this convention, the Democratic Party and the Obama-Biden ticket. In terms of coordination of message and the logistics this week, how does that all come together?
Well, the message that we sought to send by choosing Denver was that the Democratic Party is now going to be a 50-state party. We think we can win in the West. That's one of the reasons we're here. We certainly think we can win Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, maybe even Montana, and maybe even Arizona. So it's a new day in the Democratic Party, and that's part of our message. But the overall message is really being crafted by the Obama campaign, of course. They're the ones that are about to be the nominees, and I think the addition of Joe Biden is fantastic. And there's a lot of early delegates here because we have committee meetings the weekend before, and the buzz among the delegates is really, really good.
Did you have any role in the process with the Obama campaign?
No, not in selecting the vice presidential nominee, no.
One of the stories that continues to come up every 4 years is why 4 days of a convention? Do the parties need 4 days?
We have a lot of work to do. I mean, I know the media always writes about the parties and all that kind of stuff, but the truth is there's a lot of work to be done here. This is a 4-day meeting of the most active Democrats in the country. 35,000 people here now. Some of those are media, but they're, especially with the use of Invesco Field, we're going to have probably over 100,000 Democratic activists in Denver this weekend and this week. So it's a great time to network. It's a great time. We do a lot of training here, get out the vote, voter registration, a lot of seminars on health care and other of these big issues that are fallen by the wayside under the Bush-McCain approach to things. So, you know, this is important for us to do this. I know that media makes it into a big hype thing, and of course it's great to have our candidates showcased, but there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes here that's important to us for the next 4 years.
Directly behind you is Invesco Field, where for the first time since 1960, a party nominee will accept his nomination in an outdoor stadium. How did that all come about?
You know, it's interesting. The Obama folks decided to do that, although ironically, when I first was planning the convention, before I had any idea who the nominee was going to be, we wanted to do it in a stadium. We couldn't figure out how we could dare take a chance on the weather for 4 straight nights. So then we thought we needed a dome stadium. Then it got too complicated, so we sort of abandoned the idea. It turns out after we decided we were going to come to Denver, Denver's a good place to do this. You've got a great facility. You've got weather that almost always cooperates at this time of year. And so when the Obama folks called us and said this is what they wanted to do, we were really thrilled. It's a lot of work to make that kind of a change in 6 weeks, but well worth it. And it's a beautiful venue, as you've just seen.
And one of the points that has come up during the summer, the ad that was put forth by the John McCain campaign, the so-called celebrity ad. Do you have any concerns that Senator Obama accepting the nomination with 70,000 people in attendance will feed into that Republican attack machine?
I think people like their president being well respected. You know, Barack Obama went to Europe and had 200,000 Europeans waving the American flag. We haven't seen that for a long time, and if Senator McCain should win, we're not going to see it for a while. It's important for people to respect the American president abroad. And I think that, you know, the celebrity ad was mostly sour grapes because the Republicans don't have anybody like that because their policy has been so awful.
Howard Dean has been the chairman of the Democratic National Committee for the last 3.5 years. Our phone lines are open for those of you who support Senator Obama, 202-737-0002. And for those who support Senator John McCain, 202-737-0001. Lebanon, Ohio is first up. Good morning to you.
Thank you for taking my call. My question is about about how much is it? How much really does it cost? How much is it cost the average taxpayer for the convention over these 4 days? I mean, I think probably each taxpayer would like to know it.
Sure. We'll get a response. Thank you, caller from Lebanon, Ohio.
I don't know what the Republican arrangement is because I don't know how their convention has been financed. We have zero taxpayer dollars. Mayor Hickenlooper and Governor Ritter made it very clear when they put in their bid that the taxpayers were not going to put up any money for this. All the money's been raised from around the country, from Democrats and companies who want to get their logo in front of all the viewers and so forth and so on. So the taxpayers, at least in Colorado, aren't paying anything. Now, the federal government does put up money. The federal government puts up money for security for both these conventions, the same amount for both conventions, and that's for obvious reasons. When you have a big event like this, whether it's nominating a president or the visit of the Pope or any major event, you have to be careful, and it's in the federal government's interest to make sure both these individuals are well protected, and they are.
Can you provide some background information on why Denver was selected? I know Minneapolis-St. Paul also a finalist for the Democratic National Committee, and who else you were considering?
We were considering, it came down to Denver, Minneapolis, and New York. And frankly, the Republicans had some problems with their selection process, so they jumped the gun and selected Minneapolis before we had a chance to really adequately consider them. And so that pretty much took them off the table. Although Minneapolis and St. Paul are great, and we considered them anyway. But Denver, look, first of all, Denver's a great site. Secondly, they have a terrific committee that really wanted it. And most importantly, other than the beauty of Denver, it is a great city, as you're going to see this week. I think that the road to the White House leads through the West. I really do think that Democrats, you know, the people in the West are libertarian, and they don't like big government, and we've seen the Republicans become the party of big government over the past few years. They have huge deficits all the time. They can't seem to balance the budget. They are insistent on telling people what to do in their private lives, and Western people aren't like that. And we think the Democrats have a real story to tell in the West, a story of individualism, a story of opportunity, a story of freedom, and a story of connection with middle-class struggling people who haven't benefited from the Bush-McCain economic policy. So I thought it was ideal to have a convention in a Western state, and this is the biggest city in the West other than Phoenix, which did not put in a bid. So we were just delighted to come here.
Our next call from Essex, Connecticut, for Howard Dean, Chairman of the DNC.
Yes, Mr. Dean, I have a comment and a question. Many Hillary supporters are threatening to upset the convention. I'm very concerned that this show of division would play right into the hands of the McCain campaign. Also, aren't there campaign rules that a candidate like Hillary can't put her name on the roll call until she has paid off her $20 million campaign debt?
Look, I think there are a few supporters of Senator Clinton who feel like that. Senator Clinton herself does not feel like that, and I think her supporters are going to respect her view, which is that Barack Obama should be the next president of the United States. She has worked tirelessly, and I have seen it with my own eyes, in private and in public, since the nomination fight was over in June, to help Barack Obama become president of the United States. So there'll always be a few disgruntled folks, and I'm sure they'll get themselves on cable television, because that's what cable television does best. But the vast majority of delegates here are going to leave here and do everything they can to make sure Barack Obama and Joe Biden end up in the White House. These folks are thrilled with the selection of Joe Biden. He not only has great foreign policy expertise, but he also happens to be a terrific advocate for women. Was one of the big sponsors of the Violence Against Women Prevention Act, was one of the people who kept the far-right Justice Bork off the court, who was going to trample on women's rights. And so I think there really is a huge amount of unity here. Of course, the media always focuses on the people who complain, but the vast majority of Senator Clinton's supporters are going to be very enthusiastically supporting Senator Obama, and I think you're going to see that. And there's no reason for Hillary Clinton not to have her name in nomination if she wants to. She's earned that right. She had a great campaign, and she's earned that right, and the rules absolutely permit her to have her name in nomination. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all.
I'm not sure if you had a chance to see this this morning, Mr. Dean, from the Denver Post, but the McCain campaign is about to air an ad in Colorado called Passed Over, and in essence it's going to be using clips of Senator Clinton attacking Senator Obama, suggesting that Senator Obama did not want her, quote, because for her speaking the truth hurt, and Obama did not like it. Your reaction to this from the McCain campaign?
I think the saddest thing about this race is the deterioration of John McCain as a human being. The John McCain of 2000 wouldn't vote for the John McCain of 2008. John McCain hasn't given us a single reason to vote for him in the last 3 or 4 months. It's all been negative, negative, complain, complain. I think the American people are going to want a positive campaign. You know, Barack Obama and Joe Biden are going to make a great team. I thought they got off to a great start yesterday. They complement each other very, very well. You've got an outsider who's going to really change Washington, and you've got a guy who's really an expert on foreign affairs, who's going to help us steer our way through these incredibly complicated situations like Georgia, like what's going on in Pakistan. This is a terrific team. It's optimism, it's facing the future, and John McCain is the candidate of the past, and I think those kinds of ads are, I hope, a thing of the past because they haven't served our country well over the past 30 years.
We'll take a call from Somerville, New Jersey. Good morning.
Hi. I just want to say a couple things really quickly. You know, to me, it's unbelievable in this country with the amount of people we've got covering politics and the fact that from a non-esoteric standpoint, it is very clear that both these parties, Republican and Democrat, have been bought and paid for by lobbyists, conglomerates, global interests, and we've got the audacity to continually discuss politics as if something good is going to happen in this country. You know, it's amazing. This Democratic Party and the Republican Party, there's no differences between the two of them. They support illegal immigration, which is totally against the best interests of this country. The Democratic Party supports legalized killing of the unborn. It supports the condoning of various aberrant lifestyles and conforming to them as a legitimacy.
So, caller, based on all of those points, who are you going to vote for in 2008?
Well, you know, it's gotten to the point where the American electorate is so unintelligent in this country as compared to, let's say, like the Europeans, that there are other choices out there. But the fact of the matter is people just don't want to break out of the ranks of supporting these two parties. And it's a complete waste of time. I mean, we go through this whole process of discussing these issues in detail when, in fact, there's absolutely no differences between these two parties.
Let me stop you there. Thank you very much for the call. We'll get a response. Mr. Chairman?
I think that, I would disagree. First of all, there's a huge difference in terms of accepting money. John McCain's people who are running his campaign are lobbyists. Barack Obama told us the minute he got to be the nominee that there was going to be no more lobbyist money coming into the Democratic National Committee. That's a pretty big difference. I find it ironic that the caller would cite Europe, which is considerably more liberal about things like abortion rights, which the caller obviously has an objection to, and immigration rights, since they have 27 countries that are now integrated where open borders are essentially the rule. So, I certainly respect every American's point of view, but I think that one is somewhat outside the mainstream.
We'll go to Richmond, Virginia next. Go ahead, please.
Yes, hi. Mr. Dean, thank you very much for all your hard work. My statement is this. One, I like Barack Obama, but my biggest objection is he's not liberal enough. We don't need change. We need a revolution, literally. I mean, the biggest problem we have is that our entire economy is based on cheap goods from China. I mean, God forbid the Chinese should stop trading with us tomorrow, which they never will because we're their biggest customer. But the entire country, every store would be empty, literally. Our manufacturing base has deteriorated to a point where it's downright scary. And I'm not sure if anybody can change this around, and I'm just wondering how you maintain your optimism.
Well, I tell you what, I'm almost 60, and my father once told me when I was much younger and I was less inclined to pay attention to him that he had an advantage over me because he could look backwards instead of just forwards. And when you look back at the last 40 years, it's been an extraordinary 40 years for this country. There were a lot of things that were really wrong with this country 40 years ago, and they haven't all been fixed, but a lot of them have. So I understand your desire for immediate change, and that's a good thing because that helps push us forward. But change is never immediate. The caller before you, I would say, probably had diametrically opposed views on most of the things, and there are lots of Americans with different views. Change is important. I think Barack Obama is the candidate of change. You mentioned the trade issues. I think his views on trade are more thoughtful than perhaps they've been in the last administration. But I also think, frankly, there's been some good things with the fact that the Chinese have been integrated into the world economy. Their geopolitical behavior has been much more, I think, responsible since they've become a part of the world system. It's contributed to the security of the world. So it's always a good thing to focus on what's ahead of us and the problems that we have to solve. Sometimes it's not a bad thing to look back and see just exactly how far we've come. Because 40 years ago, there were an awful lot of folks in your state who couldn't vote, and in fact, a white man and a black woman were not allowed to get married in your state 40 years ago. So things have changed a lot. The country's become much more tolerant, much more accepting, much more integrated in terms of all the different kinds of people we have. Except for the last 8 years, the standard of living has gone up a lot. The last 8 years have been an aberration, but not because the country is a bad country, but because we just had bad leadership. And now we have a chance, I think, to have leadership that's going to look to the future and live the American dream again in Barack Obama and Joe Biden. And Joe Biden has certainly been a good example of a working-class kid who grew up, got himself a scholarship to a great university, worked really hard, and has really made good. One of the least wealthy members of the United States Senate, I think he remembers his roots, and I think he would tell you what a great country this is, given his own personal experiences.
Media often accused of spending too much time on polls, but Howard Dean, if you look at a survey of all the polls, this race at this stage of the game is closer than many people expected. Why?
I think because folks have already decided they don't want to vote Republican, but they've got to spend some time getting to know Barack. He's a new figure. They're going to look at him very carefully. I think at the end of the day, Barack Obama is going to be the next president of the United States because we can't go back. We can't have 4 more years of George Bush. And frankly, John McCain is 4 more years of George Bush.
Our next call comes to us from Eureka, California.
Yeah, hi. I got a question for Howard Dean. Since you're against Bush and his war in Iraq, I'd just like to remind you, make a few points. You're talking about 40 years ago, you had the guy who committed war crimes in Vietnam. Lyndon Johnson, I'm wondering if you think that was okay for him to commit war crimes. And Woodrow Wilson had a law to speak out against the government. And Bill Clinton had the World War in Kosovo. So your party, how's no room to talk? You guys had your war crimes, too.
Thank you.
I don't know who you're talking about, who committed war crimes 40 years ago in Iraq. I mean, in Vietnam, I don't know who that was.
Well, his reference was to President Johnson and also to President Wilson with World War I and the war in Kosovo with President Clinton.
Well, first of all, the war in Kosovo was an extraordinary thing to stop genocide. I mean, if you're going to use armed forces of the United States and NATO to stop genocide, I don't believe there was a single American casualty in that war. You know, I think you can't run away from using force. Sometimes you have to use force. What you have to do is tell